Fractions, decimal, and percent. We're going to jump right into some examples of how to write percents as decimals. So if you want to write a percentage as a decimal, you have to move the decimal point 2 spots to the left. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my decimal right here. I have 94, so I put my decimal, and I'm going to move it 2 spots to right here, and then my decimal is going to be 0.94, and that's 94%. Alright, the next one, I have 7.3%, so I'm going to rewrite 7.3, and I'm going to move it 2 spots and put a placeholder 0. So my final answer is 0.073, and that is 7.3%. And the last one is 0.3, so I'm going to move it 2 spots and put a new decimal point. So my final answer is 0.003, and that is 0.3%. And that's how you change a percentage into a decimal. Okay, for these next ones, we're going to change the decimal into a percentage. So on these, we're going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. Then add a percent. The percent symbol right there. Okay, so that's how we change a decimal to a percentage. So let's do some examples. I have 0.89, so I'm going to move it 2 spots to the right, put a new decimal point, and add a percentage. So my answer is going to be 89%. And that's your final answer as a percentage. Next one, 0.048. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 spots, put a new decimal point, and I have 4.8%. And that's your final answer. And the final one, I have 1.57. So I'm going to move it 2 spots, and then I'm going to get 157%. And that's your final answer. So that would be how you write a decimal as a percentage. Now we're going to write percentages as fractions. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is change the percent to a decimal, then the decimal to a percent, or sorry, to a fraction. Then we have to simplify. Okay, so that's the final step. Alright, so this first one, I have 19%. So I'm going to change that to a decimal, 19, move it 2 spots to the left, and I get 0.919. Now, because there's 2 places after the decimal, I'm going to write it as 19 over 100, and then I make sure that's simplified, and it is, so that is my final answer. The next one, I have 28%, so I'm going to change that into a decimal, move my decimal 2 spots, and I have 0.28, and that's going to give me 28 over 100, but that's not simplified, so I need to simplify that out. So if I factor out, I have 7 times 2 times 2 over my 100, which would be 25 times 2 times 2, and then I can simplify here, leaving me with a final answer of 7 over 25. And that would be your final answer. And the next one, we have 105%. So I'm going to change that to a decimal by moving it 2 spots. So that's going to give me 1.05. So that means I have a whole number, and then I have 5 over 100 because it's, again, 2 spots after the decimal. And then I have to simplify my fraction. So I have 1, and then if I, divide by 5, I would get 1 over 20. And that would be your final answer, 1 and 1/20. So there are multiple steps that we have to take in order to change a percentage into a fraction. For these last ones, we're going to write the fraction as a percentage. So we work backwards. Change the fraction to a decimal. Then decimal to percent. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my fraction 4 over 10. So if I were to write that as a decimal, it would be 0.4. So my decimal would be 1.4. And then if I were to write that as a percent, then I'm going to move my decimal 2 spots. So I have 140%. For this next example, we have 2 1/3, and we want to change that into a percent. So the first thing I'm going to do is change 1/3 into a decimal, and that's going to be 0.33 repeating. It's going to continue on. So I have the decimal 2 1/3 is equal to 2.33 repeating. Or you might just write it as 2.3 repeating. Now, if I want to change that into a percentage, then what I'm going to move is I'm going to move the decimal 2 spots to the right. And remember, this is 3 repeating, so it's going to be 3, 3, 3, 3, and it's going to keep going. So I'm moving the decimal. So I have 233.3 repeating percent, and that is your final answer. And the last problem, I have 5 over 9. So what I have is going to write that as a decimal, which would be 0.555, and it's going to keep going. And now I need to convert the decimal into a percentage, so I'm going to move this percentage 2 spots to the right, and then I put my decimal, so my final answer is 55.5 repeating percent, and that is your final answer. So those are your notes over fractions, decimal, and percent. Go through some practice problems. Make sure you can do all of these different conversions, and then you should be ready for your quiz over this material.